By seeking the blessings of God and our well-wishers, I would like to commence the academic sessions of this two-day international conference. The theme for the first academic session is Partners in the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and India. The chairperson for this session is Dr. Shomir Kumar Das. Professor Shomir Kumar Das is a professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Calcutta. He previously served as a Vice Chancellor of the University of North Bengal and a postdoctoral fellow in the year 2005 of the Social Science Research Council South Asia program based in New York. He is the coordinator of the University Grants Commission Departmental Research Support Program on Democratic Governance Comparative Perspectives. He specializes in and writes on issues of ethnicity, identity, security, migration, rights, and justice, and has contributed over 190 research papers to highly esteemed national and international journals and edited volumes. Professor Somir Kumar Das is also an advisory board member of Kolkata Society for Asian Studies. Thank you, sir, for your gracious presence. I would also like to introduce the paper presenters for this academic session. The first paper presenter is Dr. Shohili Bose, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, Sri Anandram Jaipuria College, Kolkata. Dr. Dona Ganguly, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, the Bhavanipur Education Society College, Kolkata. And the third paper presenter is Dr. Arnav Dasgupta, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, Chandanagar College, West Bengal. I would pass over the microphone to the chairperson, sir, for the further proceedings. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Saha. Good morning to all of you. After the excellent inaugural session, which I happen to have attended, I think that all of us are now enriched. It was a great learning experience for all of us, and we will follow up on it. We have three distinguished speakers. All of them are young teachers who have already been introduced to this august audience. So without much ado, I will request Dr. Saheli Bose to make her presentation. Her presentation will be on India, Maldives, Bonhomme, opportunities and challenges. So it's over to Saheli.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, and a very warm good morning to all of the distinguished guests present over here. It is always a daunting task to be the first presenter in a session, and I would try my best to stick within the time that is provided to me. I would like for this case to share my screen so that I can go ahead with my paper presentation in form of a PPT slide. So I would like if you would kindly inform me that if my screen is visible so that I can share my screen.
Your screen is visible.
Okay, thank you, sir. So my presentation is on India, Maldives, Bonhomme, opportunities and challenges. So first, I have structured my presentation in some 5 major points where I would be dealing with an introduction reflecting some historical relationship, and the second portion would deal with the post-Gyamun era onset of multi-party democracy, India's calibration, why Maldives matter, Soli and COVID-19 are their opportunities for managing the Chinese conundrum, and the challenges that loom large. So starting with the first idea of introduction and throwing some light on the historical reflections, I would like to state that Maldives is an archipelago which is situated in the Indian Ocean, which is close to the Indian mainland, and this is the location of Maldives make it all the more important. It consists of about 1190 islands consisting of 26 atolls. But however, only 200 of them are inhabited and is one of the most strategically placed island. In terms of population and land area, it is the smallest in South Asia. So, as the location of Maldives is on one of the most strategically located island, several cultures like Buddhism, Islam, the Portuguese, Dutch, and then the Britishers, they have touched Maldives shore. And it was very interesting to know that Maldives was once famous for cowries, which was in regular contact with Bengal, where cowrie was used as a means of monetary transaction. We find in the accounts of Ibn Battuta and even travelers, Arabian travelers like Suleiman and Al-Masudi, how the cowrie trade was happening between Maldives and Bengal during that time. By 1887, Maldives was made a British protectorate, and external affairs directly went on to the control of the Britishers. The country has a very tremulous political environment, which has internally affected the country and, in turn, its bilateral relation with other countries, especially with that of India. Maldives has always shared amicable relation with India. In 1965, the island got independence under the fifth constitution and declared itself to be independent and free state. 68, it abolished the sultanate and a republic was formed. Abdul Gamoon was the first president of the Republic of Maldives. Now, soon after, Maldives was formed as an independent state. It made a place in the world map. India recognized Maldives and it engaged into a diplomatic ties. Now, some scholarships were also provided to the Indian students under the Colombo Plan. Then we have the Maritime Agreement, which was done in 1976, with a trade pact in 1981 to supply essential commodities. Critical help from India happened in 1988 in the form of Operation Cactus. Rajiv Gandhi's position on the role of India and peaceful neighborhood. He was of the opinion that if extra-regional powers do take advantage of the turmoil in Maldives, that would be not be good for India's security level. 1990s relation remains comfortable with subsequent high-level visit. Uh, Even the former foreign minister, Mr. I.K. Gujral, while on his visit to Maldives, declared Maldives to be as Shangri-La of the East. Post-Gyamun era onset of multi-party democracy, 2008, first ever multi-party elections happened in Maldives history, and Gyamun was replaced by Mohammad Nasheed as the president from the Maldives Democratic Party. His regime kind of led to an oscillation between India and China, the Asian giants. Uh, During his time, embassy was opened in Malé. Tourist industry was revived with the help of the Chinese, as the Chinese seeking vacation. They made the highest number of tourists arriving in Maldives. But however, there were certain clarifications that came from the president himself when he declared in the head of meeting of for the Commonwealth and as well as SAARC platform that we won't do anything that threatens India. But subsequently, the political turmoil led to his resignation, and Wahid undertook the reign of the government. India believed to be a change of power rather than a coup. Now, this is what was being said by the Secretary West of in Ministry of External Affairs. Not a cricket match, too soon, too much too soon. So basically, it was India's reaction that it was not very clinically rational to interfere in what was happening in the political turmoil in Maldives. And India sends M. Ganapati, who goes over there and take stock of the situation and said that violence should not be any option and India should talk with all the stakeholders involved to end the violence soon. Now, the possible thing, most anti-India thing that President Wahid could do was to cancel the GMR project, and he also bagged 5 million US dollars in assistance from China, batted for China to be given a full membership in SAARC, much to India's discomfort. Uh, Allegations were always there that he had come to power with help of the Chinese, but Chinese sent clarification as no intention of fishing in the troubled water. Now, the regime of President Yamin and the Chinese friendship had a deep impact on India-Maldives relation. 2013, Abdullah Yamin was elected as the president from Progressive Party of Maldives. Sir, am I audible?
You are audible now. There was an external noise. Now the noise has subsided. So please carry on.
Okay, thank you, sir. 2014, we see an extra bonhomie between China and Maldives in terms of President Xi Jinping's visit with 100 delegations, very significant as any Chinese president to visit Maldives since Maldives gained independence. The basic idea was to garner support for the Maritime Silk Road initiative, also to garner support for the Chinese-led Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. And also China helped in building a bridge which was linking Male, the capital, to Halhule Island, and construction of housing units. Now, the free trade agreement was another bone of contention that we find, where the President Yamin declared that 95% of the Chinese goods would be the tariff would be reduced to 95%, of the Chinese goods would be reduced to zero. And the FTA would lead to the trade creation and trade expansion. Here it has to be mentioned that fishery, which is considered to be one of the main major industries in Myanmar, Maldives, was facing a very, very critical point at that point of time, because in 2011, Maldives was upgraded to a middle income country. And after becoming the middle income country, EU kind of stopped giving a concession to the fishery products that was exported from Maldives. So Maldives was in a lieu to get exposed to the highest populated market of the world, which being China. Now, what interests China in Maldives? China's energy dependence on Indian Ocean region, its status as the largest partner with IOR countries, Maritime Silk Road positioning for 21st century power transition with USA have all triggered renewed interest to take a fresh look at IOR state, especially Maldives, whose geopolitical location in the region gives it enormous importance. Now, India's calibration. Why Maldives matter? Basically, first, we have maintaining the sea lanes of communication, the free sea lanes of communication, which is very, very important in the Indian Ocean region, with several choke points. And we have around 90,000 vessels which crosses over the northern Indian Ocean region, contributing to about 9.84 billion tons of commercial goods per year. Basically, this is what makes the Indian Ocean region a very, very significant contributor in trade and contributor in goods and energy trade. Then we have the Chinese ambition, which is very, very evident. India as net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, political stability of Maldives, Chinese massive economic presence across South Asia is also a area of concern for India. And India is seen as a benevolent aid provider. For example, the tsunami relief aid, which was provided in 2014, the water crisis where India rushed two of its INS ships and a plane carrying water to Maldives Island when it was facing. Now, in the background, what we have is the Indo-Pacific in mind, various sub-regional initiatives which call for Maldives cooperation and the neighborhood first policy. Now, as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, it is very much a new term in India's foreign policy. And we do have a separate desk which was operated in the Ministry of External Affairs, showing the importance that Indo-Pacific is now holding in India's foreign policy dimensions, and the various sub-regional initiatives which India looks forward to form in the Indian Ocean region, ranging from Quad to East Asia to IORA and Sagar, India's own Indo-Pacific initiative. Neighborhood first policy, as we all know, that it is one of the most strong policies that have been taken by the Modi government in the present phase of time. Next is Soli and COVID-19. Can Chinese conundrum be managed? 2018 was a time when President Soli was elected as the president, and he chose India for his maiden visit. India announced 1.4 billion low-cost loan. His policy, Soli's policy, was India first policy, pledging for providing full support to India. And PM Modi also visits Maldives. Number of capacity building measures signed. FTA with China, which was one of the major area of concern, was decided to be scrapped. Now, this slide does say it all, that why it is important for India to step in and to take a look at what is happening in its South Asian region, because of the major financially stressed project, and where specifically China is leading to a debt trap diplomacy. 75% of the external debt of Maldives is to China, which amounts to about 3.5 billion. Infrastructure projects might not generate enough revenue to meet the loans that has to be paid forward. Even for the Chinese projects are concerned, like infrastructure and housing, they mostly employ the Chinese laborers and kind of materials that are sourced not locally but from China itself, thereby leading to unemployment, or a source of unemployment rather, in Maldives. Specifically, COVID-19 and its impact, tourism, as we all know that tourism is one of the very, very important revenue generator in Maldives, has been hit hard. August 20, 500 million US dollars for connectivity project, high impact community development program, which is very much needed in Maldives. For example, the ecotourism projects which are to be generated. India provides 250 million to Maldives for its stressed economy. Sending of sanitizers, masks, recently about lakh doses of COVID vaccine within 96 hours of vaccine drive in India. All these are very, very important, where India can have a gain over, or it can bring Maldives back again into its sphere of influence. And a kind of arrangement which is the air bubble arrangement. Basically, an air bubble arrangement is an arrangement where it happens between two countries, where the two countries decide that it would be a kind of a smooth run for airlines to reach each other countries. So it is the first kind that has been taken in South Asia. And also there is a direct cargo ferry to be established, where the talks are going on, which may give a serious high boost to the trade which is taking place. So with all these points in mind, I would like to say over here that, as in the very first session, Professor Sahadevan, he talked about common destiny, and taking mutual cooperation into a fact that our destinies are interlinked, and we do share a common future. It is very, very important to have a reciprocity that would bring the relation to the next level. Now, what about the challenges that loom large? Internal political stability, financial stability. Already the IMF in 2020 has predicted that GDP growth for Maldives, as in most of the countries across the world due to the COVID-19, would be minus 8.1%, which is 15% below the average. So that would take a huge toll on the Myanmar's economy. and of course the Chinese ambition that we have to take care of and deal with it. Of course, it is there to stay with us. So with that, I would like to end my presentation and thank you for listening and bearing with me and giving me a chance to present my paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bose. Without wasting any time, I would now call upon Dr. Tona Ganguly to make her presentation. So, Ellie, if you could take your slides off. Yeah, thank you. Just unmute yourself. Unmute.
Sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. Very good morning to Chairperson, sir, and to all the members of Kolkata Society for Asian Studies who are present and the august audience as well. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present my paper here in this platform. So today my topic of presentation is India in the Indo-Pacific, balancing with Maldives and Sri Lanka. Already the previous speaker, Dr. Bose, she has already touched upon the significance of Maldives for India in the context of Indo-Pacific as well. So by now my task becomes really brief, because now I have only to add some few more points to whatever she has said already. But anyway, I will try to put my presentation in a very briefly. I'll try to present it and wrap it up within the time limit that has been given to us. So basically, I will like to start with the point that in the 20th century, in the in the purview of international relations, the concept of maritime security, or rather, if I say the importance of ocean, has increased a lot, right? So it is being said that the maritime security architecture is now can be considered as the falling under the purview of traditional security with naval presence to safeguard the borders and port security. In 1956, United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas Conference was in fact considered as the first step towards addressing the territorial water claims and access to the natural resources which are present in the deep sea ocean bed. Now, in this context, keeping this in mind, India's maritime security strategy now focuses on all aspects of traditional and non-traditional security paradigms of maritime security, such as environmental degradation, migration, climate change, energy security, human trafficking, and piracy. Indian Navy is also playing a bigger role in humanitarian and disaster relief and non-combatant evacuation operations. However, it is very noteworthy here to make a special emphasis here is to take up the question of blue economy. In fact, India's major concerns in context of the Indian Ocean, its presence in the Indian Ocean, around the Indian Ocean, I mean, the geopolitics of the Indian Ocean, if you say, is the concerns with the blue economy. Now, what is blue economy? Blue economy, it is basically, envisages the integration of the ocean development, principles of social inclusion, environmental sustainability, innovative business models, fishery, aquaculture, renewable ocean energy, ports, shipping, seabed exploitation, and maritime tourism. Now, Indian Ocean nation states make a very strong case for blue economy. An exceptionally important role here is being played by Maldives and Sri Lanka if we consider in the context of India's maritime strategy. Now, with India's role in Indian Ocean or India's maritime security strategy, this has been this has been a long academic debate has been there. There are many scholarly literature, reviews, articles, many things have been there. It is a point of discussion which actually so it has a very strong place in the context of the Indian foreign policy domain. However, in the recent years, in the recent time, there has been yet another concept which has also gained in ground in the context of India's presence in the Indian Ocean, and that is the concept of Indo-Pacific. Now, this Indo-Pacific as a term, it has been used by different countries in several different ways, because Indo-Pacific as a geographical area, it's a huge area where there are a lot of countries which are involved. For example, Australia, Bangladesh, Canada, China, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Seychelles, Singapore, South Korea, Sri Lanka, United Kingdom, and the United States of America. So, evidently, each of this particular country has defined Indo-Pacific from the context of their foreign policy, domain, or foreign or national interest, if I say, or national security. So they have defined the region in their own way. For India, the way Indo-Pacific construct, the Indo-Pacific as a term has been conceived, was very clearly first indicated during Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018, when the present Prime Minister Modi, he said that Indo-Pacific indicates a geographical reach of India's idea of Indo-Pacific, starting from Africa to the Americas, which covers both the Indian Ocean in tandem with that of Japan. Now, India's policy perspective on Indo-Pacific, which is popularly addressed as Indo-Pacific Initiative, includes inclusiveness, openness, ASEAN centrality, universal respect for international law, freedom of navigation and overflight, sustainable development, and that this concept, very importantly, this concept is not directed against any particular country in the region. So this point is the most important, probably the most important characteristic feature or the trait of this construct, that this particular concept is not directed against any particular country in the region. Now, towards achieving this end, what Indo-Pacific stands for India, India has initiated Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogues (IPRD) with this the sole objective of achieving cohesion in the region through maritime connectivity, then regions transition from the existing brown to the blue economy, and obviously with a special emphasis on India's concept of SAGA, that is security and growth for all in the region. Apart from the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue, India has also initiated maritime exercises, and the most important part of those exercises, the most important one being the Malabar Naval Exercise. Now, the next very important or the crucial portion of India's construct of Indo-Pacific is that India now has started to project itself as the net security provider in the Indo-Pacific. Very recently, Modi's mantra of Atmanirbhar, Prime Minister Modi's mantra of Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliant India, is also demanding that India is in the position to become the net security provider in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, the concept of net security provider actually emerged. I mean, for the first time, it emerged in the maritime military document, which is said ensuring secure seas, Indian maritime security strategy, which was kind of released in a Naval Commanders Conference by the then Indian Defense Minister Shri Manohar Parrikar in 26th October 2015. And in this document, the net security provider, the concept is very clearly stated as a state who can actually give the overall security to the region. How? By balancing prevailing threats, inherent risks, rising challenges in the maritime environment, and it does so by monitoring, containing, and countering all of these obstacles. Now, the term was actually for the first time in context of India, however, was used in the Shangri-La Dialogue Forum in 2009, where Mr. Robert Gates, the Defense Secretary of United States, he expressed in a very clear term that we look to India to be a partner and a net provider of security in the Indian Ocean and beyond. Now, India's quest for establishing itself as a net security provider has eventually resulted into three groups of Indian partnerships in the region. The first is Quad. It is an ad hoc group including Australia, India, Japan, and United States that facilitates formal discussions on areas of mutual cooperation in the region. Second is ASEAN, where the India has emphasized on revitalizing its ties with the Southeast Asian countries. And now this entire policy initiative has been put under one umbrella concept, which is, we all know, that's Act East policy. The third one is the most important one. It is the partnership with the Western Indian Ocean countries. And here, the work which has been taken up by India is the Coastal Surveillance Network. And in fact, from here starts the importance of, as a matter of fact, starts the importance of Sri Lanka and Maldives in the Indo-Pacific region, because this coastal surveillance network is a chain of radars that provide comprehensive live monitoring ship movements in the Indian Ocean region and connect Indian radars to the similar systems in Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, and Seychelles. So when it comes to the question of Western partnership with the Western Indian Ocean region, Maldives and Sri Lanka's significance, importance, whatever we say, it emerges in a very big scale. Now the question comes, the thing is that how India is trying to balance with Maldives and Sri Lanka in the Indo-Pacific, or why India needs Maldives and Sri Lanka in order to expand its role in the Indo-Pacific region. First, I like to take up Maldives very briefly, as already has been told in the previous discussion, the significance of Maldives for India, but very briefly, Maldives is basically, you can consider Maldives as a toll gate between Western Indian Ocean choke points of the Gulf of Aden and the Strait of Hormuz on one hand, and the Eastern Indian Ocean choke point of the Strait of Malacca on the other. So basically, Maldives is very geographically, it is positioned in a very crucial area where it is becoming a kind of a gatekeeper kind of a nation who is actually allowing the entry and the exit throughout the belt of the Indian Ocean region from the west to the east. However, another thing which has also to be kept in mind is the international shipping lanes. So the international shipping lanes is in the vicinity of Maldives, and obviously they are controlling the global maritime trade, and from this context also it is important for India. However, we all know that during President Abdullah Yamin's regime, the too much proximity with China, Maldives, China's debt strategy towards Maldives falling in the debt trap of China, it obviously kind of, hampered the Indo-Maldives relation. But however, under the Soli government, India, with its commitment towards neighborhood first policy, and MAIL, on the other hand, MAIL with its India first policy, both of them seem to be in tune with each other. They are committed towards each other in ensuring a very co-prosperity sphere, in creating a co-prosperity sphere and a very cooperation between the two countries, resultantly in order to ensure the the development of the region in question. Now, these two neighbors, there are two neighbors. In the third week of February 2016, India dispatched many potent warships, aircraft carrier and INS Vikramaditya, accompanied by modern indigenously constructed guided missile destroyer INS Mysore and fleet replenishment tanker INS Deepak, which they gifted a made in India petrol vessel and to the Kamiam to the Maldives National Defense Force. So in this way, we can see a very strong defense cooperation is building up between India and Maldives. Now, when we come to the question of Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka also plays a it's a peninsula, as we know, the southern tip of peninsula of India. Sri Lanka is located there, and obviously it is strategically very important for India. It is India has many vital strategic stakes in Sri Lanka, because an unfriendly Sri Lanka or a Sri Lanka under influence of a power unfriendly to India would strategically discomfit India. We all know the history, the war-torn history between India and Sri Lanka, and the series of the events, the political and the historical events which took place. So we know that the strained relation between these two countries are very strained. It's a kind of a sweet or a sour relation, we can also say. Sometimes going for bonhomie, but in most of the times a gross enmity between the two. And apart from that, Indo-Sri Lankan foreign relations are very much decided and determined by the internal political factors of India. And this is quite strange, where foreign policy behavior between two nations is considered by the internal domestic policy political environment. So basically, the Sri Lanka is important, so it cannot be overlooked here also. And in Sri Lanka, in the Rajapaksa government in September 2020, Rajapaksa government for the first time had a virtual conference meet with Prime Minister Modi, where the neighborhood first policy was appreciated by the President Rajapaksa, and he also kind of appreciated India's cooperation during the time of pandemic. India has already released a line of credit worth USD 100 billion to Sri Lanka for 3 solar projects. And apart from that, India, Maldives and Sri Lanka, which is the most important part to be noted here, has entered into a trilateral maritime regional security, tripartite maritime regional security arrangement. It was signed in November 27, 28 in 2020. It was the 4th India, Sri Lanka, Maldives trilateral maritime security. Here, all the 3 nations have kind of focused mainly on the maritime domain, including the discussions on the common security concerns like terrorism, radicalization, money laundering, cyber security, then emphasis on the development of Sagar, then also how to deal with the China factor, China's increasing presence in the region, and as well as they have also kind of emphasized on the blue economy initiatives. However, so far, the thing seems to be really rosy enough, really promising enough that in the Indo-Maldives and Sri Lankan partnership or balancing in the Indo-Pacific, can bear very good results in the future. But here are, I would like to kind of wrap up my entire discussion by posing 3 questions here, or rather 3 thoughts which are absolutely, my opinion. I think that in spite of the defense agreements, defense pacts, naval security exercises, and the concept of commitment towards each other, the first question which often comes, or rather which is quite disturbing in my opinion, is does India's neighborhood first policy is really a policy which wants to take all the states together, the neighboring states of India together, and work together for a common mutual benefit in the region? or under the veil of neighborhood first policy, there are certain hegemonic ambitions which India wants to exert in the region by eventually by interfering in the domestic politics of the countries present in the Indian Ocean region or in the Indo-Pacific region, as a matter of fact. This is number one. Number two, in the post-COVID economic era, with a given falling GDP of India, will it be possible for India to engage such huge sums of money in defense sector or in the naval sector when the economy is just falling to the ground? Is it not important to raise the economy first and ensure the economic security of the nation? Or is it more important to extend your presence in the neighborhood regions? So that becomes a question, that whether economic security or the national enigma or image becomes more important here. The third one is the South Asian space. Why I'm saying South Asian space? Because if I'm taking Sri Lanka and Maldives and India together and trying to build a security regime, as a matter of fact, so introducing South Asian space in the core of Indo-Pacific initiative or in the core of the Indo-Pacific region, how far it will be possible, because all the South Asian countries, specifically the Indian Ocean regions countries, each of them has their own equations with the other big powerful countries which are present in the Indo-Pacific. All the countries in the Indo-Pacific, the rest, apart from India, the big powerhouses, they are all eyeing on these two countries, Sri Lanka and Maldives, with some greater dangling in front of them with carrots, which are even sweeter than what India is offering to them. So in case of such offerings, can these countries, these two countries, can really, for the long term, can really go with India, can resist those offerings, and will be able to cooperate and cooperate with India and try to take India's mission or objective, whatever it is, in the Indo-Pacific? Will it be successful? So these are the three, the three facts which becomes challenges or kind of questions which comes up in the context of India, Sri Lanka and Maldives' presence in the Indo-Pacific region, or India's expanding presence in the region with the help of Maldives and Sri Lanka. These are the challenges, or these are the questions which actually I think might come up in the near future. So with this, I would like to end my discussion. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you all the audience for listening to me, and for once again, for giving me this opportunity to present my paper here in this platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ganguly. And the three thoughts that you leave us with, I guess that this will be debated in course of discussion. So I would request the audience to keep the thoughts with them and hold their thoughts till we have the occasion of discussing them at the end of the session. So it's over to Dr. Arnab Dasgupta. He will be speaking on the theme which has already been included in the schedule. So it's over to Arnab.
Am I audible, sir? Hello.
Yes, audible, sir, audible.
And am I visible, sir?
Yes, visible, sir.
You are both audible and visible. Just carry on.
Okay. A very good morning to, thank you, sir. A very good morning to respected chairperson, sir, and everyone present in the meeting, and warm holy greetings. My paper, the title of my paper is India's Relations with Sri Lanka, a mark of India's engagement with the Indian Ocean region. Now, India and Sri Lanka have civilizational bonding since time immemorial. Political relations, however, have ever been a victim of extraterritorial power play. such power play emanated from and are directly linked to the greater power play being played in the Indian Ocean region. Sri Lanka, by virtue of its location on the northern tip of the Indian Ocean region, is very well aware of its strategic advantage. India, on the other hand, as a regional power, has had to pay sincere attention to a small yet strategically important maritime neighbor. India's relations with Sri Lanka have centered on the issue of autonomy of the Tamils, Sri Lankan Tamils, residing in the northern and eastern parts of the island nation. The matter was not that much procedural as that was substantive because of the clear ethnic divide in the island nation. The decimation of the LTTE in 2009 provided the Sinhalese-controlled Lankan administration a unique autonomy in the regional power structure. This trend for regional autonomy has further been accelerated by the emergence of China as a potent maritime force in the Indian Ocean region. China, for a variety of reasons, has been showing keen interest in the Indian Ocean region, and Sri Lanka quite naturally has been into the picture for quite some time now. Now, at this moment, what troubles New Delhi is not exactly the close proximity or close bonhomie between Beijing and Colombo. More than that, the proactive strategy of the Chinese PLA Navy in the larger Indian Ocean. Thus, New Delhi's approach to Colombo will be a mark of India's overall reaction to China's jealous assertiveness in the larger region. Now, if I may point out, what are the recent irritants, very recent irritants in the bilateral relations between India and Sri Lanka? First of all, the death of 4 Indian fishermen in the Fox Strait by the Lankan Navy patrolling boat in January 2021, the very beginning of this year. And this was followed by MEA, Minister of External Affairs, issuing a strong-worded démarche to the Lankan Navy. It has always been decided whenever the two sides meet to resolve the issues of fishermen and fisheries and fishing amicably, but that has not been done. Much progress has not been made on the ground, as we have seen this incident. And another thing was the cancellation of the India-Japan-Sri Lanka tripartite memorandum of understanding on the East Container Terminal at the Colombo port in February 2021. This was another roadblock. This was somewhat resolved by Sri Lankan, Colombo's proposal to negotiate with an Indian company, the Adanis, to give them the contract for West Container Terminal in the port of Colombo. So that was a sort of concession, but the final decision has not yet been taken. Very recently, on 23rd March 2021, a few days ago, India abstained from the UNHRC resolution meet on human rights violation issue of ethnic Tamils in Sri Lanka. We have to keep this in mind that China, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, apart from Bangladesh and Pakistan, China voted against the proposal, but India abstained from the meet. This shows that India has to keep in mind the Lankan sensitivities while taking a firm stand on the Tamil issues. New Delhi has been, however, insisting on the Tamil autonomy issues under constitutional provisions, although without much progress on the ground yet. Earlier, India stayed aloof from the political resolution of the Tamil issues, lest it lose the Lankans to the Chinese. However, that did not help either. After the coming to power of the Rajapakshas, no new proposals have been provided to India. Instead, the previously signed MOUs or proposals or contracts under the NUG government have also been put under scanner for reconsideration. Now, India should always keep in mind its own strength and limitations. India can hardly afford to counter China at every point of engagement while maintaining the core policies of multi-alignment and strategic autonomy. Indian policymakers has always been averse to direct and clear-cut policy framing so that enough space is left for strategic flexibility in a given frame of situation. So Sri Lanka would definitely mind its own interests. So will India. There has to be equilibrium. So far as military capability is concerned, China is set to emerge as the second most powerful maritime force in the Indo-Pacific, leaving India far behind. Frequent visits by the planned ships or PLA Navy ships to different Indian Ocean littorals, not only Sri Lanka, but Mauritius, Seychelles, and other places. They testified to this. For a country like Sri Lanka, it is only natural to reap the benefits from strategic rivalry between India and China. Nevertheless, Colombo can only afford to ignore India's core sensitivities at its own cost. India being the regional power, Sri Lanka would always try to keep warm relations with New Delhi. So it shows that as New Delhi needs Colombo, so does Colombo need New Delhi. Again, New Delhi always needs to pay heed to Tamil issues in Sri Lanka. It was the Tamil leadership that objected towards the Chinese-sponsored hybrid energy project in the northern parts of the country, island nation. So Tamils are they are there who can safeguard our interests. Thus, ignoring the Tamil issue in the hope that this would fetch some concessions from Sinhalese controlled Colombo regime would do no good to New Delhi. At the same time, India has been taking a tolerant approach. Any downward trend, it has to be borne in mind by Colombo that any downward trend with regard to the Tamil issues would jeopardize the fragile peace in the island nation, and that would also make Sri Lanka fall for Chinese debt trap, as it would lose its attraction as an ideal destination for investments. And it shows that China has been supporting international Korea regimes, countering Western sanctions, as evident in case of Sudan, Myanmar, or Iran. But it has never been very keen to get involved into any state's internal matters. Interference in the internal crisis in any state would undermine Beijing's commercial relations. Therefore, Sri Lanka also needs India's cooperation in maintaining regional stability. China's maritime overtures to the Indian Ocean island nations and littoral states have therefore raised concerns for New Delhi. This is so because New Delhi has been in the habit of considering the northern Indian Ocean as a natural extension of its sphere of influence, or rather area of influence. At the same time, New Delhi would also not compromise its strategic autonomy, while maintaining an assertive role in the Indian Ocean region. This has been evident in India's aversion to fall in the US line to become a part of to take active part in the US-led Quad. Whatever drift has been witnessed in recent times that was caused by India-China border clashes. So, in fact, China wants to keep India boxed in the South Asian region and to keep it away, to keep India away from the South China Sea region, because for China, South China Sea is much more important, and to assert its hegemonic power there is very much part and parcel of China's core national objectives. So China considers South China Sea as a natural extension of its sovereign area of influence. So one Chinese strategy is to keep India away from South China Sea and to keep it engaged in the South Asian region by opening two fronts, the Himalayan fronts and the ocean fronts. So China has been bent on sending a message to India that the latter's overtures to the US-led containment policies would place India at a disadvantageous position vis-a-vis China. So far as South China Sea is concerned, China seeks to limit India's strategic stretching to the region by itself engaging robustly in the Indian Ocean. Now, India's approach to Sri Lanka would definitely be a mark of India's greater engagement, larger engagement with to the other Indian Ocean littorals, other Indian Ocean states. So far as India's vision of Indo-Pacific region is concerned, it based on two pillars. Firstly, India's vision of the Indo-Pacific acknowledges interdependence and interconnectedness of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And it is based on, secondly, it is based on the policies of multi-alignment, which is a modern version of its non-alignment policy, and strategic autonomy. So Sri Lanka, India, first of all, India has to keep these things in mind, and India has to keep in mind its own strength and limitations. India has to accommodate Chinese presence in the larger region, keeping the vital national interests intact, whereas other stakeholders like Sri Lanka and other stakeholders like Mauritius, Seychelles, and all other states, Maldives, for example, must realize that by ignoring the geographic proximity with India, they cannot go free and far. They need India. They need China. At present, they need China more than India because of sheer financial capability of China. They don't. They are welcoming in China's financial resources, but they are not in a position to raise protest against China's military presence in the region. I would rather say that they are buying resources from China, or they are buying investments from China at the cost of their strategic autonomy. But they are not in a position to raise concern, raise alarm towards Chinese presence in their region, in their sovereign areas, because they are much smaller states. So it is quite natural for them to look for playing the China card, playing China off India, playing China against India. But India will also need to keep in mind that it cannot counter China at each and every point of engagement. There has to be a clear picture, a clear calculation of its own limitations. Not only the economy, but defense procurement is a very sensitive issue, has been very sensitive issue in India, and it needs a constant and over time. I mean, it needs a gradual investment. Not any wholesome lump sum amount would be allocated to the defense sector. It wouldn't help India to gain hard power, because India's insistence on soft power would limit India's power of maneuverability in respect of these smaller nations, smaller neighbors. Because China has resources, China has military. China has force projection power. China has ready forces. So India has to accommodate those things, and India must adjust its expectations from these smaller nations, because whatever resources India has been offering to these smaller states, they are very minuscule compared to China. So for the time being, I think India should accommodate the Chinese presence in its neighborhood, because otherwise India would be left far behind. So, and at the same time, what India should do is to raise the issue of Tamil, Sri Lankan Tamils residing in Sri Lanka. That would provide India sort of, bargaining power to India, although keeping a good relations with Colombo is a priority for New Delhi. But at the same time, ignoring the issue of Tamil the Tamils residing in Sri Lanka would be disastrous. So for the larger Indian Ocean region, India has to accommodate Chinese presence in the larger region, keeping the vital interests, of course, keeping vital interests intact, whereas other stakeholders must realize, other stakeholders means Sri Lanka, Maldives, and other smaller nations, smaller island nations in the Indian Ocean region, that by ignoring the geographical proximity with India, they cannot go free and far. That's all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Arnold. Now we have heard three excellent presentations. I would request all of you to keep in mind that there are similarities and differences, although they have reflected on the same situation, same landscape of events, and perhaps the same scenario, but they are not completely in agreement with one another. Maybe that you will have questions, you will have comments. So I will request you to turn on your video and audio and just shoot your questions. Please begin your question with the person to whom it is directed so that the speakers can take note of your questions. Thank you. Or alternatively, you can also post your questions on the chat box so that we get to know what your questions are, and we would request the speakers to answer them.
Can't see the chat box.
So yes,
I want to ask
yes,
one.
yes. You can introduce yourself. You can turn on your video if you so desire.
My name is Padmini Balram, and I'm from Shilpa Sadan Vishwabharati. I wanted to ask to Arnab Dasgupta, his last comment. He said that India should take Chinese presence at in the neighborhood, otherwise it will be more problematic. Now, if China is playing in the like way China could keep us occupied in the northern region, as you mentioned, then similarly they could attack very easily once their presence is so strong in Sri Lanka and Maldives. It takes minutes to come. I mean, China over there, especially from Sri Lanka, it is just nothing. It's just an overnight jump. Not even by small boats, it doesn't take overnight. So it would be even more dangerous because over there, at least in Ladakh and all those regions, the Himalaya protects to a certain extent, while there is nothing like that to protect us in these regions. So opening it up and saying, China, aap bhi aa jao, and then the Chinese policy being very distinct, very like they're not very open to many things. Would it be not very dangerous for India? What do you think?
Thank you for your question. I think it's an excellent question, very pertinent, of course. And I would request Dr. Dasgupta to note this question, and maybe that I will, at the end, I will give some time to each of the speakers to respond to the question. So if there are other questions, let us pick them up from the floor. If not, then maybe that Arnab may start responding to the question that was asked, and meanwhile maybe that we would be sort of prepared for some more questions and comments. So it's over to Dr. Dasgupta.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for the question. I think the scenario in the north, is somewhat different from the scenario in the south, because as I have mentioned while reading my paper, that Indian Ocean is of vital strategic importance to China for a variety of reasons. For example, energy security and Indian Ocean, the Indian Ocean sea lanes of communication. Any problem along the sea lanes of communication would create ripples along the entire sea lanes of communication, having its impact on the entire global energy, not only energy, global trade routes, global trade regime. So commercial interests, which are very much dear to the Chinese, as it has been very much evident throughout the ages, commercial interests could prevent them from fomenting any trouble from the south. But in case of north, it is rather easier. For example, the BRI, do you think that? I don't think so. That creating troubles from the north, keeping in mind of the close proximity of the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, would be could be a very wise decision on part of the Chinese, because India, of course, has some sort of military capability. And so far as the southern assaults are concerned, I mean, predicted southern assaults are concerned, I think the chances are very minimal because of commercial interests of the Chinese themselves. They do mean business. So they have taken a predominant position in the South China Sea without firing a single shot. So they believe in other types of engagements, not direct military assault, always.
But that is also, but that also, if they take another kind of engagement, also is kind of will break our economy. So that also is important, isn't it?
But ma'am, taking part of the global economy involves all these risks. You will have to have a strong economy or strong economic structure. Otherwise, you cannot take only the advantages of the global economic regime. You will have to bear with all other problems associated with that.
Thank you, Warner. We have two questions which have been posted on the chat box. I would request all of you to respond to them because these questions seem to have cut across the speakers. The first question comes from Shafiq Sultan. The question is, what will be Indian multiculturalist vision along with key dimensions and implications for Indo-Pacific region? So it's basically a question on what will the Indian model of multiculturalism be for the countries of Indo-Pacific, Sri Lanka and Maldives, because these countries are already indebted to China. What will be Indian alternative way for India to isolate China neighborhood policy? So there are two questions. One question is that what will be the appeal of Indian multiculturalist model to these countries? And the second question is that what would India's policy be to quote unquote isolate China? Because you may not agree that China needs to be isolated. I guess that Dr. Dasgupta will not agree with this. So this is one question. The second question comes from Joydeep Narzari, and I read it out. In the context of Atmanirbhar Bharat, how far it will encounter China? So you know that it's like sort of what has self-reliant India to do with the China? Is it actually targeted to mitigate what all of you have described as China factor? Because it is a failure to execute infrastructure in stipulated time that India has to face in the Maldives. Your comment. So this question is specifically directed to Dr. Ganguly. The first question cuts across all of you. So I will begin with Sohini, and then I will come to Donna, and then to Arnav.
Yeah. As far as multiculturalist vision, along with the key dimensions and implication for Indo-Pacific, specifically Sri Lanka and Maldives are concerned, we have to take into consideration that the Chinese have been able to, keep their feet in every part of the South Asian country as far as their economic, strength is concerned. And the alternatives that can India think at this moment to have with the Chinese is to not seriously go and say that yes, this is time for me to take over this region, and whatever you have done, you just be out from there. This is not going to happen too soon. But what we can alternatively do is to take into consideration more of the capacity building approaches that can build that can develop local employment, that can bring a kind of credibility in these countries with respect to that of India. So perhaps this is going to be a slow process carried over the years. But yes, of course, once India do have a strength of the economical strength to control these countries in terms of giving them soft loans and meeting with their expectations, perhaps we can take into consideration that this would be an alternative approach that we can talk of.
Thank you. Dr. Ganguly, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Actually, if you ask me, then I will say that given the present scenario, right now the economic situation of our country is such, as I have already in my concluding part, as I have already touched upon, given the economic situation of our country, I genuinely raise doubts regarding the infrastructure build up, or as if you ask me, as Dr. Bose has, she has also now said capacity building. Yes, of course, we have talked about capacity building, we have talked about India as a net security provider, but I have genuine doubts that can we really can we really provide the capacity building, or can we really go for multilateralism as a matter of fact? Because do we have that kind of asset with us right now in the post-pandemic era, specifically right now? Because I think we have to think rationally. There will be policies, there will be initiatives, but the fact is that you should go with rationally. You have to think capacity building, military assistance. This can all be viable alternatives for India to counter China in these two states. But as Dr. Bose has said, that the process will take time. But the thing is that right now, the process will definitely take time. But right now, are we genuinely in a position to do that? That is number one. Number two, if we really in future, in another 2 or 3 years, if we are able to recover our economy from the staggering state which it is right now, then I think instead of tickling with or interfering with the domestic issues of these Indian Ocean's smaller states, if India genuinely think about only cooperating or only focusing on the infrastructure build-up, connectivity issues, which are the mantras of neighborhood policy, neighborhood first policy. The mantra of neighborhood first is connectivity. So if India genuinely only harps on this point, instead of kind of indirectly or directly, tacitly getting involved in the internal issues, internal affairs of these countries, then I think it can, in the near future, can wane away the Chinese influence gradually. Because I think that whatever it is, China's debt strategy, Belt Road and initiative, whatever it is, all these strategies, they try to infringe upon the sovereignty of these dated nations. This is what is actually China's strategy, that you are infringing on the sovereignty and making them dependent, which is very much the policy of neo-colonialism or neo-imperialism, whatever you say. Yes, Dr. Bose.
No, before you respond, I think it's over to Dr. Dasgupta, because he has a question and he has to respond to it. Maybe that way you will get another round, and we will have another round of questions and comments. Arnab, unmute yourself.
Sorry, sir. Thank you. I think there are two questions. What will be India multiculturalism or multiculturalist vision. First of all, I think India has been putting too much emphasis on soft power infrastructure. For example, the age-old ties between the ancient Hindu empires and with the Southeast Asian nations. But I don't think that the same is reciprocated by the Southeast Asian nations. For example, it's a unique case study of history that many nations don't want to look back to their historical ties with India, because India does not have that much, that much hard power to support its soft power infrastructure. Whenever India will have enough hard power, that would reflect its soft power infrastructure, reflect in its soft power infrastructure. So far as this first question is concerned. And the second question is, what will be Indian alternative way for India to isolate China? I think, is it necessary to isolate China or to safeguard your own interests? Safeguard India's own interests. So to isolate China, for example, you can have better relations with Mongolia. You can have better, you can have strategic bonhomie with Vietnam, but to isolate China nowadays has become almost has become an oxymoron. Okay, for example, India has been very much loath to take active part in US-led Quad, and there are some reasons, there are some valid reasons behind that, because we are not very sure that who is going to be the ultimate, which country is going to be the ultimate powerhouse of the global power, in the world, in the far away future. So taking sides or taking a firm stand against China I don't think would be in India's own national interest. That's all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Let me have another round of questions, and Shafiq has another question. So I'm just, it's being posted on the chat box. Should India have an alternative to China neighborhood policy? Just keep that question in mind. I guess that this was also answered in the way the speakers could. So maybe that let's wait for some other questions to come. If you have any question, any comment, please feel free. We have little bit of time, and we have little bit of time for the panelists to respond to your questions. So till pending that, let me come over to Dr. Bose, and if she has something to respond to. Unmute.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for giving me some extra time. These comments are in response to Dr. Ganguly. Actually, what I have to say is that, yes, definitely we have to take into consideration the economic situation that India is in, along with the world, if I'm not wrong, I would say that. And, you have to also take into consideration a very important factor, that how your neighbors perceive you. How do they see you? So when you are talking about the net security provider in the region, it is also these small island nations that they look up to you, and they look up to you in such a way that they, they expect kind of India to provide certain help or kind of aid to these countries. And as far as the things that are concerned in the neighboring areas, I think India's forte has to do with this kind of playing of this perception of to how do they see India in this kind of light. So yeah, this is also, I to me it is also an important factor. And secondly, I don't know, I mean, this is a kind of a question that is open to the forum, that we talk about isolating China, we talk about managing the Chinese conundrum, but doesn't China feel threatened? I mean, this is what I have to put forward. I would seriously like to know if there is anything like that, or if this is a pertinent question. I have no idea, but yeah, this is what I wanted to comment on. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks to all the participants. Thanks to the panelists as well. Um, I don't think we can actually sum up the discussion. Let me confess that the discussion has been very rich and we learned a lot. Let me just say, if time permits, I will take just a couple of minutes to quickly wrap up the discussion. Insofar as we are reflecting on a region, I was asking myself that what are the alternative visions of this region that emerge from out of these three presentations. These are not to be called truly alternatives to each other, because you know that international relations, any scenario in international relations is a mixed scenario. It's not sort of pure, or let me borrow a term which Max Weber has made famous, an ideal type scenario, so to say. I think that three scenarios of this region suggest themselves. One scenario which I don't think was reflected here, but it's a very strong scenario, increasingly gaining traction, particularly in recent years, in recent writings, is this, that you can think of this region as one composite region with all its historic, ethnic, cultural, civilizational continuities. In other words, it's a civilizational region, a region which consists of a number of nation states, but essentially belong to one single region. Now, you know that recently the idea of civilization is being debated, has staged a comeback in international relations theory, particularly in theoretical circles. So this is one kind of argument, and one can actually stretch the argument a bit further by way of arguing that the nomenclature that you can give unto this civilization is Mahabharatvarsha or something like that. It's an extended India with its expanse across the countries. This is one kind of scenario, and each scenario also will have a particular foreign policy response from each of the countries involved in the region. Secondly, you can think of this region in terms of a mini civil war between, mini Cold War between India and China, in which the main purpose of India should be to contain China, how best you can contain or maybe isolate China. But you know that Cold War partners, Cold War, if India is to be made into a Cold War partner vis-a-vis China, then one has also to think in terms of, let's say, one asymmetry of power between China and India. Because, you know, Cold War partners need to be equal. That's what the theory of Cold War tells us. The second is that how best you can contain China. Can you actually contain China by diplomatic overkill only, or you need to be equally powerful to contain China? Powerful meaning militarily and economically powerful. So this is the second kind of scenario. And if, for instance, we assume that there is already a Cold War that has ensued between India and China, then you can actually think of many of these smaller island countries as non-aligned countries. If you draw on the analogy of Cold War, They are non-aligned in the sense that they can actually pick one great power off against another and can actually leverage one against another and thereby can actually gain. Much in the same way as non-aligned countries, the erstwhile non-aligned countries could do vis-a-vis the superpowers. So this is second kind of scenario, which you can describe as quote-unquote Cold War scenario. Cold War, if you choose to name it, let's name it as Cold War 2.0. It's a sort of coming back, return of the Cold War in on a regional scale. The third is, and this is an insight which I draw from Dr. Dasgupta, is that can we think in terms of having a region which is actually one composite community, where China will not be sought to be isolated, or China will not have to be contained, but China will be a partner. And remember that the title of this session was Partners. So you know that how you can actually make China a partner is the real challenge, instead of isolating or instead of containing China. So these are the three scenarios, and like I said that none of the scenarios is mutually exclusive and doesn't exist in its pure ideal typical form. And accordingly, you know that the vision actually elicits a particular foreign policy response from each of these countries, which are an integral part of this particular region. So with these few words, I conclude the session, and let me say that I learned a lot from the panelists, from those who had their questions and comments. And thanks once again to KSAS. I am very deeply associated with Kolkata Society for Asian Studies. And thanks once again for having given me the opportunity of being part of this panel. Thank you very much. So it's over to the organizers.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I congratulate all the paper presenters, and thank you, Chairperson sir, for chairing the session. We are going to have the lunch break now. So we'll be meeting again at 2 p.m. for the second academic session. Looking forward to meet with you all. Thank you. And we'll be meeting again at 2 p.m. for the second academic session. Thank you.